Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're cooking old-fashioned soup beans. Now, a lot of y'all might have a bag of these beans in your pantry. You might have bought them to stick them in there for maybe food shortages or storms when you couldn't get out to get food. And you might have even had somebody give them to you, or maybe gotten them at a food bank or something like that. Today we're going to show you how to cook these, and we're going to give you the recipe for the old-fashioned soup beans, the kind that have been made ever since pinto beans were discovered, I would imagine. And we're going to use fatback or salt pork in them, but you don't have to have that. Now, cooking dried beans is a really simple process, and there's two basic ways to start it, and I'm going to go over both of those, but I'm going to show you one. We're going to do about 2 cups of dried beans today, which is about 1 pound. And 1 pound of dried beans is going to make about 2 quarts of cooked beans. So when you're measuring them out, and keep that in mind, these big Dutch ovens that I have here, you can only make about 2 pounds of beans in them. Any more than 2 pounds of beans is not going to fit in them. The dried beans make a whole lot more than, or they make a whole lot more when you cook them. So these 2 cups are going to turn into 2 quarts. And if you do 4 cups, of course you would have 8 quarts. So most of us probably do not have a pot big enough to cook more than 2 pounds of beans in. Okay. I don't normally measure my beans or anything out. I just put some in the pot, and then I make sure I have them covered with enough water, whether I'm going to soak them or parboil them. And I have another video where I did the parboiling technique. I will make sure that's linked in here. If you want to see that, that might have some information in it. But what you want to do is get out however many beans you're going to cook, and about 1 pound is all I ever cook at one time. And you're going to cover them with more than enough water to cover them with. You want to fill up with about 2 quarts of water for those 2 cups of beans. And then you can let them soak overnight, like 10 to 12 hours, or you can put them in a pot and bring them to a boil for 5 minutes or so, turn them off, let them sit for 1 hour, and that will bring them to the same point that letting them soak overnight does. Now, once you've either parboiled them or let them soak, you want to rinse them off and put some fresh water on them. So I'm going to do that now. I mean, you can see how cloudy this water is. You don't want to cook that. Okay, once you've got your beans soaked or parboiled, whichever way you decide to do them, and you want to rinse them off, then you want to add again enough water so that you have at least 2 quarts of water in them. And you want the water at least 1 inch above your beans, because your beans are going to continue to soak up water as they boil, and you're going to have a little bit of water in them as they cook to keep them from burning and sticking to the bottom of your pot. So now we're going to put our beans in a pot. Now you can see in these big pots, I could cook at least twice this many beans. You don't want to overfill your pot when you're cooking beans, because there's a pretty good chance you might have to add a little bit more water to them. And you do need to keep an eye on them when you're cooking them, and if they start to get dry, maybe your lid doesn't fit real tight, maybe you didn't soak them quite as long and they're soaking up more water, you might have to add more water. Also, cooking times are going to vary. It's going to depend on how long you soaked them, how hot you're cooking them, you know, how high you've got the stove turned up. You know, all that stuff is going to affect the cooking time. You're going to cook them anywhere from 3 to 6 hours maybe even a little bit longer, depending on what texture you want. So the only thing you have to have really to cook dry beans is dry beans and water. Now I season mine with a little salt and pepper. Normally I get out my bacon grease jar and I put about 2 tablespoons of bacon grease in this many beans. Your leftover bacon grease is great for seasoning beans, but today we're going to use Fatback or salt pork. And this was traditionally used because this is a cured form of bacon and it doesn't have to be refrigerated. So old country women would keep this in their cabinet, their can room, their smokehouse, and they would just cut off a chunk and throw it in the beans, and that's all you do. And like I said, I add a little salt and pepper to mine, and I add some when I start it. Now, if you are on a low salt diet, you can wait until the end of cooking and add your salt at the end of cooking, or not add any at all. But I like to put a little bit in here now, and then I taste them when I'm done. I do about a teaspoon of each when I start, and if I need to add a little bit more when they're done, then I add a little bit more. That's basically it. You can cut up some onions in here. You can use a couple of slices of bacon in here if you don't have the salt pork or you don't have leftover bacon grease. Or you can totally leave it out and do vegetarian beans. And in the other video, I did the vegetarian beans. I didn't put any fat at all in it, and they are very good. I do, though, prefer a little bit of fat in mine. It makes them a little more filling. We talked about what fat does for us when we eat. It does help fill us up a little bit more. And if you're making soup beans in a time when food is scarce, you might want a little fat in it to help fill you up. But if you don't want that, you certainly do not have to put it in there. And all you're going to do at this point is put your pot lid on, and you're going to put it on the stove. Turn it up on high until it starts to boil. And then you want to turn them down on low. And you want to let them sit there and simmer until they are done. Like I said, cooking times really are going to vary a lot, and that's going to be based on how long you soaked them, if you parboiled them, how long you boiled them, and how long you let them sit there after you brought them to a boil. And it's also going to kind of depend on what kind of texture you want. When I make soup beans, I like the bean to be pretty soft. I don't like any crunch at all left in it, but some folks do. And here's my fat back in there. It cooks down a little bit, and it's going to do that. And you can actually add as much of that as you want. You can add a little piece, you can add a big piece, and the same thing with the bacon grease. If you want a little more in it, you can put a little more in it. But in this many beans, I would do about 2 tablespoons. If I was going to do bacon grease, or bacon instead of bacon grease, whole strips of bacon. If I had the thick stuff, I wouldn't do more than 2 strips in this many beans. If it was thinner, you could do up to 4 strips. But how you tell your beans are done, when you scoop them out, and I don't know if you can even see this, they will start to crack, like the skin will peel on them. And if you mash them, my goodness, they're hot. They should be really soft and they should mash easy. And that's how you know that your soup beans are done. Like I said, cooking time just depends. Most supermarkets around here do not carry Fatback, but if you happen to have some place that has one of the stores that do the Amish goods and things like that, some of the whole food stores have it in them. You can find it in there. You can also season your soup beans with a salty ham, like country ham or something. You can throw some of that in there. And most folks serve them with some chopped up onion and cornbread. You just about have to have cornbread with them. And if we were going to do a big meal with soup beans, we'd do some fried potatoes, maybe some corn. But always the cornbread and the onions go with it. And in the summertime, cut up some fresh tomatoes and cucumbers. And if you got cornbread, soup beans, tomatoes, and cucumbers, buddy, you've got you a hillbilly feast, especially if you fry a few taters to go with it. This is one of those foods that has saved generations from starving. And I know with all the shortages now and the inflation that a lot of folks are going to have to get back to cooking meals like old-fashioned soup beans. And like I said, you don't have to have the salt pork. It's a very good use for your leftover bacon grease. So make sure you save that, and you can season your beans with that. And just some vegetables with them, because beans are very, very high in protein. They saved your grandmas, and they'll save you too. It is time to get out some of those old recipes and go back to some of those old ways. And this method of cooking beans will work for any dried beans, kidneys, northern beans, even peas and stuff, dried peas. You cook them the same way. You soak them or you boil them and let them sit, and then rinse them and boil them. You do want to make sure you rinse them because they're dirty. They actually have dirt on them, and you don't really want to eat that. It's not going to hurt you after you've boiled it for 3 to 6 hours, but it tastes bad. And if you don't rinse them, they will taste bad. And you can see, even rinsing them, my soup and my beans is still plenty rich looking, and it's brown. The only thing you have to do when you're cooking them is occasionally, like every hour or two, stir them and make sure they have enough water in them. That's it. It is super simple. You don't need to be a great cook to cook dried beans. If you rinse them and you don't let them dry out and you cook them till they're done, you got it. And put a little salt and pepper on the table, because sometimes folks like a little extra salt and pepper in them. Everybody's taste is a little bit different. Get a bag, keep them in your cabinet, because there's a lot of meals in a bag of beans that big. I said this 2 cups is going to give you 2 quarts of soup beans. That will get you through some tough times. And because the times are what they are, I want to leave you with Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee, yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Folks, if we have God, we will get through this. And as long as you know who holds the future, you don't have to worry about what the future holds. God will get us through this. He will provide for us. He will protect us. I want to thank y'all so much for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. If you have not already, don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. If you have never tried soup beans, give them a try. They're as good as your granny and pa thought. Until next time, remember to put God first.